this lesson, we're going to talk about the heart and the general structure and its function. The first thing that we have to look at is that the heart's responsibility is to act as a pump. It's going to circulate the blood throughout the entire body. Well, let's take a look at where it's actually located. Well, in the chest, there is a space, and it's a cavity known as the mediastinum, and it extends all the way from about the bottom of the trachea to the xiphoid process, which is right about here. And it extends all the way from the sternum, and it goes backward towards the vertebral column. And it's a cavity, and what it does is it encases the heart. And this is going to be, that's your mediastinum. The other thing you need to know about location is where the base and the apex are. And the apex is kind of this point. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the base of it is this area right here. And it's located right at about the second intercostal space. So this is one. This is your first rib here. So this is one. And then you have another rib here. So this is two. So it's located somewhat in this region. Then you have the apex, which is your point. If you look at your heart here, it comes kind of to this point, looks like this. I want you to take a look at this structure right here. This is the clavicle or the collarbone. And it's really important to know kind of where it is, because you're going to, if anytime you're looking for the apex of the heart, you're looking along the midclavicular line. So we're going to cut this clavicle in half right here, and we're going to go straight down. And what we're going to do is we're going to count to the fifth intercostal space. So it's between the fourth and fifth ribs, which is about right here. So 1 is here, 2 is here, 3 is somewhere in here, and then you got 4, and then you've got 5. So it's kind of right in this region right here. In terms of structure, the heart is made up of muscle. There's a great lesson on cardiac muscle contractility and how it all works together, and I encourage you to check those lessons out. But when we're talking about specific structure here, we need to look at 3 things. First, you've got the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium, and these are the layers of the heart. So what we've done is we've taken this guy and we've blown it up so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Well, the endocardium is the innermost layer, and it's composed of simple squamous endothelium, and it is smooth. And the reason it's smooth is because it prevents clotting. So it's this layer right here. So you've got this layer right in here, and it has a serous membrane alongside of it, and that helps to reduce that any clots from forming on the inside. Then you have this middle layer, which is a myocardium, and this is the heart muscle. It's a thick middle layer. So when we talk about cardiac muscle, we're really oftentimes talking about the myocardium. It's the big part of the heart that's responsible for all of the heart squeeze. Then you have the epicardium, and the epicardium is this outermost layer. And there are a couple of things that you need to note about the epicardium. First off, it's known as the visceral pericardium, and we're going to talk about the pericardial sac here in a second, but it's also known as the visceral pericardium. It's the outermost layer of the heart, and it's going to release fluid to the outside of the heart, which kind of leads me to my next point when we talk about the pericardial sac. So there is literally a membrane that goes all the way around. And it's made of there's 2 sides of it. There's a visceral pericardium, which is the outside of the heart. And then you have the parietal pericardium. Now, what the pericardial sac does is every time the heart beats, it reduces friction between the beating heart and other tissues. So imagine having the heart beat every time it beats and rubbing up against like the lungs or some other tissue, you're actually going to create friction. So it's going to reduce that friction. And you have the parietal pericardium, which is this outer layer here that I just drew, and it's made of white fibrous connective tissue. And inside of this, between the epicardium and the parietal pericardium is going to be this fluid, and this is the pericardial fluid. And it's made up, and it fills a space in between that visceral and parietal pericardium. And what its responsibility for, what it helps to do, is that anytime there's trauma or direct impact to the heart, what happens is it helps to reduce any sort of jolting. But let's get to the bulk of the heart and kind of how its structure is made. Well, the first thing we need to look at is that it's divided kind of 4 ways. So you have upper, and you've got lower, and then there's a right and a left side. The upper chambers of the heart are called the atria, or each atrium. You have a right atrium and a left atrium, and they are connected directly to the ventricles. So this is an atrium, this is a ventricle, this is an atrium, and this is a ventricle. The atria are separated from the ventricles by these valves, and valves are essentially doors that allow blood to flow from one chamber to another. On the right side, you have the tricuspid valve, and that's going to be between the right atrium and the right ventricle. And then you have the mitral valve, or the bicuspid valve, and it's located between the left atria and the left ventricle. So it's this guy right here. These are also known as AV valves or atrioventricular valves. And when we're talking about blood flow from the body back to the heart, which is kind of where where atria come into play, you have on the right side, it comes from this is the inferior vena cava, and this is the superior vena cava, and they come in and they dump blood into the right atrium. From the left, on the left side into the left atrium, they're going to come from these pulmonary veins here. So these are the right pulmonary veins, and these are the left pulmonary veins. When we start talking about ventricles, these are your lower chambers of the heart. You've got a right ventricle and a left ventricle, and they're going to force blood out of the heart to their respective areas. So the right ventricle is actually going to go from here, and it's going to go up to the lungs, where it's going to collect oxygen and then come back. And then from the left side, it's going to go from the left ventricle through the into the aorta here. This is the aorta. And the doors, quote unquote, that they pass through are these things called semilunar valves. On the right-hand side, you have the pulmonic valve, and on the left-hand side, you have the aortic valve. And here's how blood flow works on from the ventricles: is you have blood exiting the right ventricle via this pulmonic valve into the pulmonary artery, and then on the left side, it exits through the aortic valve into the aorta, and then it goes to the rest of the body. But let's recap. When we're talking about the heart, we have to remember that the heart is a pump, and it literally acts to circulate blood throughout the body. It's made up into 4 chambers. You have 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Your atria are going to be your upper chambers, and your ventricles are going to be your lower chambers. They are separated by valves, so your valves are essentially doors. You have the tricuspid and mitral valve, and that's going to be on the between your atria and your ventricles. And then you have your semilunar valves, which are going to be from your ventricles to the body. They are located in the mediastinum, and it's going to be your apex is going to be at that 5th intercostal space along the mid-clavicular line. So basically cut that clavicle in half and go straight down to between the 4th and 5th ribs. And lastly, the structure. It's made of those 3 heart layers: the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium. And I encourage you to go check out that lesson on cardiac muscle cell contractility. It's a great lesson. It's going to give you some insights to what's going on there. That's it for the structure of the heart. Be sure to check out all the resources attached to this lesson. Now go out and be your best selves today. And as always, happy nursing.